Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us. So the other day, I was asked to write an op-ed and make some predictions about where I think AI is going this year. And my first thought was that if I did that, I'd probably end up being wildly wrong. Many of the people working in AI love to make predictions, but that doesn't mean they're any good at it. 9 months ago, Elon Musk said that 2025 would be the year that chatbots became smarter than humans. Sam Altman thought it would be the year of the AI agent, when fully autonomous AIs would enter the workplace. And Dario Amodei from Anthropic predicted that by the end of the year, AI would be writing 90% of all software code. Now, if you had any of those things on your 2025 bingo card, well, I'm sorry to say, but you're out of luck. We're 2 weeks into the new year, and none of them have come to fruition. So full disclosure, I have no idea if we're going to get AGI this year, or humanoid robots. If the people building it can't figure it out, I doubt I can either. But just as I was about to turn down this assignment, I realized I do have some predictions about AI. Not about the technology itself, but about the ways it could reshape our world. So in this episode, I wanted to try something a little different. I thought I'd turn the mics around and invite my producer, Mitchell Stuart, to ask me some questions about what's in store for the year ahead. Mitch, welcome to Machines Like Us.
Thank you for having me on.
The only person who's listened to literally every word of the show and done it many, many times.
The deepest fan.
Yes. Well, I would never assume.
So I'm looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts about the year ahead. But I think before we do that, I'm wondering if you can sort of reflect back on the year we just had. How would you describe sort of the arc or the story of AI in 2025?
Yeah, it's funny, because I think for years and years and years, AI was the thing that was going to matter. And I think this year, it happened in a meaningful way. It took a little while after the launch of ChatGPT for it to become normalized into society, for people to experiment with it and see what it was useful for and not. And in some real ways, I think 2025 was the year of AI adoption. You can see it too in the stances of governments, right? Where for years there was a focus on safety and security and potential harms to come from AI. And just over a year ago at the Paris AI Summit, every government there pivoted and announced that they were going to barrel full speed into AI adoption. And that's been the case in most countries. We've moved from some concern and some apprehension to a full societal-wide, in many cases, adoption agenda, immersing ourselves in this technology.
Yeah, it was interesting. Sort of anecdotally, I think this was the year where people stopped Googling things and people started ChatGPTing things. If you have a question, that's now where you go for an answer, whether it's
for sure
academic, professional, or personal. That's become the dominant source of information.
Yeah, I think that's right. And depending on how sophisticated or young in some ways you are or old you are, you use that Googling metaphor literally, right? So some people are literally using it as if it was Google when it's not. And a sort of AI native generation is using it as a new kind of search, right? And in a totally new set of ways, which sort of signals that there's a whole new set of use cases and norms that are emerging around this technology.
So let's get into some of your predictions for the year ahead. Your first one is that the politics around AI are going to become a lot clearer this year.
Yeah.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, this is kind of the flip side of the adoption agenda. I mean, I think most incumbent governments in democratic countries have made a bet this year. And the bet is that if they push for widespread societal adoption of AI, they have an opportunity of a massive productivity gain in their society. And for countries like Canada that have real productivity problems and have for decades, this is a very sort of attractive proposition. They think it could lead to new spaces of economic growth right? So a new generation of AI companies domestically could emerge that can drive growth.
And to be clear, this is the current politics of AI that we're seeing.
100. I think that this is the governance priorities, right? So governing parties that are in power at the moment, have all kind of collectively made this bet on AI adoption. The problem is that citizens aren't fully on board. In Canada, as we've talked about in the show, 80+% of the country think AI threatens their jobs. 80+% support thinks there's core safety issues with the technologies that are being unleashed in their lives. And so that to me signals that there's a potential political opportunity for parties or political leaders to oppose the adoption agenda. And in some ways, it's a win-win situation, so to speak, for political opposition. Because if AI works, even if it's wildly successful, there's no assurance that the financial gains of that increased productivity are going to be evenly distributed. It could very well be that it leads to mass layoffs. So even if it works, there could be a political liability, right, for the government making the bet. And if it doesn't work, they've just pivoted our economy towards a speculative bet that didn't work. And that's a political liability. So I've been surprised we haven't seen it yet, but I think we're starting to see the sort of green shoots of new political rhetoric emerging in the US, certainly, amongst the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And I imagine in Canada, we're going to start to see it too, potentially both on the right and left. I think there's a sort of populist opportunity here to push back against this dominant narrative that AI is good for us and for our lives.
Why do you think it's taken so long? Like, it seems like such an obvious political tentpole issue.
Yeah.
You were referencing some of the polling data before.
Yeah.
Only 32% of Canadians think the benefits of AI will outweigh the risks. 88% support stronger governance. And you mentioned there's some green shoots. I think we've seen Bernie Sanders in particular start to really take this on as sort of a defining issue for him. But it hasn't been adopted or picked up in a really widespread way.
Yeah.
Why not?
It's a good question. I think in some respects, the potential opportunity and upside of the technology is real. And it's hard to separate what's real from the hype. And I think it's hard for everybody to do that. And I don't think anyone's immune from getting caught up in that. And it's not easy to become sort of an obstructionist to something that has this kind of momentum that the AI sector has. So I think that's one. I think the other is just the amount of money being invested in it. I mean, as we talked about in the show, like $1 trillion of capital investment into a technology in the US alone brings a lot of people along, right? You're floating a lot of people. And large part of the American economy is now dependent on this technology. And that affects everybody. So I think there's some built-in immunity there from like people taking an aggressive oppositional stance right out of the gate. And it was also uncertain whether the opposition and the skepticism that citizens felt to the technology early on was going to be lasting. It could just be that was sort of a fear of an unknown. And once they started using it and saw the utility, that they'd flip, right? And I actually think that was the belief of many governments and still is, frankly, right? That this is a communications problem and a familiarization problem. People just need to bring it into their lives, see the utility, and then those like pull numbers will shift. In fact, the opposite has happened. They've gotten worse over time. And I think that's now created enough space that some political parties can jump in.
Yeah, well, the harms are becoming clear. You're seeing sort of
that's the other piece of it. I mean, that's clearly the other piece, right? That took some time to happen too, but like parents are seeing it and so on and so forth.
But you're also seeing companies emerge whose explicit goal is to displace labor. Like it's gone from sort of being an abstract thing to now we're seeing organizations spring up with that express goal in mind. And I think that's going to sort of catalyze people's fears around things like job displacement, entrenching wealth inequality, all of that kind of stuff.
I mean, that's one of the most, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think the most jarring thing of the year that I've realized is how much of the investment going into AI actually is happening because they see the opportunity to displace labor markets. Like that's the pot of gold that they're going for, right? And if a VC wants a 20x return on their investment, there needs to be a revenue source ultimately. And I think they say that the thing they're going after is to displace labor. That's where the money is.
Right.
And that's pretty remarkable, right? That we are making the scale of bet we're making on a technology which at least one of their core objectives is to displace human labor. And that's a pretty big bet. And it could go wrong in many number of ways. We could end up in a utopia where we're all on universal basic income, making $100,000 a year for following our passion, and maybe we all live happily ever after. I think even the people building it don't think that's the likely future. Elon Musk just a couple of days ago said he expects both a unemployed society with high UBI income and also massive social unrest.
But let's keep going.
But like we started the show by saying his predictions are almost always wrong. So like maybe that's okay in this case. But like the people building it are deeply worried about what they're building, not just because of the potential existential threat, but because of what it's going to do to society. And one of the big things that they think it will do to society is lead to mass unemployment and mass layoffs. And that there's no point in history where that has happened and it goes smoothly for the decades after. So if they're right, we're in for a rough ride. You got to believe the governments who promoted these policies will also be in for a rough ride, and there'll be a new political debate around AI emerging. And I think, look, I don't know. I'm not saying there's going to be a political leader. I'm not saying the NDP is going to elect Avi Lewis, who's going to run an anti-AI campaign in the next federal election and win. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think he's going to have an anti-AI platform, and one of the major parties in Canadian politics will be running against AI.
So I think we all are becoming familiar with what a politics of AI boosterism looks like, because we're all sort of living through one right now. But because it hasn't really emerged yet, what might a politics of AI skepticism or AI opposition look like? Like, what does that actually entail in terms of policy or rhetoric or positioning?
I think it will mean a few things. I think there'll be a pretty salient movement around child protection, about potentially keeping AI out of the lives of children in the same way we've seen it around social media. AI in schools and in the education system, and AI as a tool for pedagogy will be a place of debate. What the value is to this as a pedagogical tool and what it's doing to brain development. I think there'll be a space carved out there. I imagine a union movement against automation, pushing back against, for example, robot use in auto manufacturing. I think you'll see a pushback against investment of AI companies in Canada. So things like, should we in Canada be courting Amazon to be building data centers in Canada, for example, or Meta or OpenAI? So I think there's a whole host of ways it could emerge. But the short answer is I don't think anybody's figured that out yet. You see trial balloons emerging, and Sanders has been one of them, floating them. But you don't see a cohesive political ideology yet emerging on either the left or right, frankly. But I think you'll see two different ones emerging, one on the populist right and one on the slightly more populist progressive left, with slightly different colors.
And it feels like there's sort of two buckets of approaches here. One would be trying to regulate the technology, like you just alluded to, in schools, how it's interacting with kids. But then there's this whole other labor side policy conversation about UBI and things like that. Things that have up until this point really only seemed like sort of science fiction.
But that's worth pausing on, because the things being projected do sound like science fiction in all sorts of respects, including what it'll mean for the future of the human species. And there are very prominent people in the AI space who are building these technologies who believe we're going to invent a new kind of life, right? That is a hybrid of human and AI-based life form, right? And they speak very openly about that ambition and that being a good thing. It's hard to imagine, if that's even proximate to being true, there not being a political movements to stand up to defend the the integrity of the human mind or the integrity of human life form, right? Like, and it sounds science fiction-y, but that politics and that ideological debate will emerge if what they're saying is at all true. And it looks like they will in part be true, right? Like that's part of this year we're seeing is that many of the things that were speculative have become real. And if we head in that direction, I can imagine all sorts of politics emerging around what that means. And whether we want it, frankly. Do we as individuals have any agency in whether this is imposed on us? And I think that if that's not a space for politics, I don't know what is.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear from the polling in Canada and elsewhere that by and large, people don't want it, which is why I think it's so surprising that the politics hasn't emerged sooner and more clearly than it has now. I mean, people want to keep their jobs. I don't think people want to consume synthetic art. I don't think people want their kids developing relationships with chatbots. Like, I think probably people don't want these things, but there is sort of a Silicon Valley ethos that's pushing all these ideas forward because they're technologically exciting and innovation is exciting. But it's not really reflecting the desires of broad publics, I wouldn't say.
No, I don't think it is yet either. And so what is it about the bet that is so compelling that we're willing to make it as a society? And I think that's a question we need to be asking ourselves, or whether a degree of caution in this adoption agenda is probably warranted. And I think this will be a year that we see some of that friction. I think it'll happen in politics and it'll happen in some other ways too.
Yeah. So stemming from that, your second prediction for the year is that democratic governments are going to start taking digital governance seriously again. And maybe just a little bit of backdrop for our listeners before I throw it to you. We've sort of spent the last 20 years figuring out how to regulate social media or Web 2.0 and whether regulation was even necessary. And in the last couple of years, a real global consensus started to emerge that it was in fact necessary, that if we wanted digital technologies like social media to be safe, then there needed to be some degree of regulation put in place.
Yeah.
So the UK, the EU, Australia all passed really robust social media legislation packages. In Canada, we got pretty close with the Online Harms Act. In the States, with COSA, they got pretty close. So this real consensus was forming that this was sort of essential to operating in the digital space. And then all of a sudden, in the last year or two, that enthusiasm has really dried up and governments seem much more hesitant to enter into the digital governance conversation. So describe to me the moment that we're in now and how we got here. Like what happened, what accounts for that pretty dramatic shift in positioning?
Well, look, I think there was an initial thought that some of those same rules would be applied to AI. So when AI first emerged, not first emerged, but when this latest iteration of AI first emerged, the EU, for example, passed the AI Act. The Canadian government developed ADA, or AI and Data Act, which ended up not passing. But they were applying a lot of the same principles that we'd applied to social media, making companies do risk assessments, forcing some transparency on these companies, that sort of thing. And I think there was an assumption that those would just sort of evolve into the AI space. But then a few things happened. One is ChatGPT emerged. Soon after the passing of the AI Act in Europe, ChatGPT emerged. And the whole conversation around AI changed just fundamentally. And the hype around it was unprecedented, frankly, for a technology. And there was a momentum to it that wasn't aligned with governments soberly stepping back and figuring out a complex regulatory regime for putting some guardrails around this tech, right? So that happened. The second thing that happened is a massive amount of investment into it, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars internationally put into this industry. It's very difficult for governments to put brakes on a sector that's receiving that kind of investment from private markets. And the final thing that happened is the US happened, right? Like America changed. And America went from participating in somewhat reluctantly, but participating in international conversation about regulating technologies, to one of pure opposition to such efforts. And in fact, going around the world and saying, if you try to regulate AI, we will bring the full force of the United States against you right? EU government trying to do this. So you put these things together, a huge amount of hype and uncertainty, massive economic investment and potential economic upside, and the threat of the US cratering trade deals if anyone touches these technologies, tries to regulate them in any way. That created a chill. And that chill lasted a couple of years. Now, I think for some of the reasons we were talking about, that chill is going to reverse slightly. I don't think we're going to get an era where governments are imposing widespread regulations on the AI sector. I think they're too in the adoption game themselves to do that. And the threat from the US is big enough still that would be unwise. But I do think if governments want their citizens to adopt this technology, they need those citizens to trust it. And that is going to take some degree of imposing guardrails and rules around it.
So the first part of your explanation for why there was that chill was that there was pretty broad buy-in into the narratives that we were being sold by the tech companies, that AI would be transformative, that it would transform our economies, that it could lead us into this sort of post-work utopia or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see some harms emerge. Do you think those harms are enough to shift the balance? Like, we're still being sold this narrative that it's going to be transformational, that it's going to turbocharge our economy.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's shifted sufficiently to kind of reorient the policy direction?
I don't know is the answer. I really don't know. We're going to see pretty soon in Canada. The government's going to announce its national AI strategy in the next month or so. And that'll be a real sign of, are they sticking to their guns of what they said when they were elected, when this government was elected, where they were all in on AI, and that their posture was going to be a very pro-AI adoption agenda with limited regulatory intervention? Or have they heard some things that we've been talking about, and are they feeling it, and are they seeing it as they've been developing the strategy across the country, that some guardrails and some safety precautions are going to be needed to hedge against this bet a little bit? I mean, we'll see, right? I think the threat of U.S. retaliation is still very real in the minds of our government. And so the question they're facing is a difficult one, right? Is what cost is it worth bearing to protect Canadians against technologies that are currently unregulated? And that's a difficult place to be. I don't envy it, honestly. So we'll see where they fall.
I wonder if we can drill into some of the specific safety concerns. So you just participated in the government's AI strategy task force and were asked to sort of opine on issues of public trust and safety.
Yeah.
I want to get into some of your suggestions about what the government should be doing, but maybe just to level set a little bit, like when we're talking about AI safety concerns, what's most salient for you there? Like, what are the biggest safety risks with AI as it's currently being deployed?
I mean, safety is a tricky concept to be a catch-all for this conversation, I think, because people mean really different things from safety. So it goes for everything from like existential risk, like Bengio and Hinton see safety as like a technical problem, right? As something that like the technology will do things that will lead to our species becoming extinct, right? Like
the end of the world. That's safety concern number one.
And that is bucketed under safety. And so is things like kids using chatbots in a way that doesn't harm them, right? But I don't think that's the sum total of what a democratic government should be concerned about. So I sort of think there's three big priorities. One is this sort of personal safety, like the safety of the people using these technologies, right? Not necessarily the existential risk things, which we can have a debate about, but just from a day-to-day use. Like if we're using, for a Canadian citizen and I'm using this product, is it doing things that could potentially harm me, right? And this is most salient around kids' use of these technologies. And we've seen far too many cases of kids being harmed explicitly by these technologies, right? Of being convinced to harm themselves. Shocking number of cases of kids being told and taught how to commit suicide by these chatbots. That's obviously on the most extreme, but other things like what are the mental health implications of them falling in love or becoming very close with an AI companion? What are the pedagogical implications of them schools relying on AI to teach children? Like, there's a bunch of like less shocking, but also very impactful implications of these technologies being embraced in our lives. And I think it's incumbent on governments to ensure that the products that are used by Canadians are safe, and AI is no exception. The second slightly broader category, though, is what it's doing to the information we all consume in a democratic society. And I think here there's another sort of set of worrying signs, right? That the reliability and credibility of the information that we receive online is going down. The amount of automation and AI-derived content in our information ecosystem is exponentially increasing, to the point that this year might be a year where there's more AI-generated content than none on the internet and in our social feeds, right? So if in a democracy we care about the integrity of the information we all consume, then that's a real risk too that I think governments need to be focused on. And then finally, I just think there's some core democratic principles that we need to navigate as we bring a technology that's as powerful and impactful as AI into our lives. Like, do we all buy into doing this together? Do citizens have a voice in what technologies they want to use in their lives, they want their kids using? And I think it's pretty incumbent on governments to ensure that they do, right? To ensure that they're a part of this conversation.
So at the risk of going down a bit of a policy rabbit hole, what do you think the Canadian government should be doing to it? Maybe we can take those one at a time. So the safety concerns and then the information integrity concerns. What was you just wrote a memo on this. Yeah. What were your suggestions on how best to tackle this?
Do you really want to prompt me to go down a policy rabbit hole? There's some risk here. We could lose some serious audience. The very truncated version is, and it's in fact good news in a sense. Like, I think we have a lot of the tools at our disposal already without having to develop complicated new AI regulations, which I actually don't think we should do. Right? I don't think we need a sweeping AI bill or AI act that imposes all these rules on AI. I think there's some very simple things we can do. And the first one is pass the bill that you talked about before, which is the Online Harms Act, which is based on consumer safety. And we just can apply it to AI as well, or AI chatbots, as well as to social media, which it was designed for. And all that would do is it would say that AI companies need to do risk assessments on their products before they launch them in Canadians, right? So if I'm building a chatbot that is marketed at children and it allows children to have sexualized conversations with that chatbot, that might get flagged in a risk assessment, right? So some base safety requirements. I mean, there was just this case this week of Grok deploying en masse to all Grok users across X a undressing capacity, right? Like, if one had done a risk assessment on that product, they probably would have found that that was a potential abuse of a technology they were about to launch, right?
Just to pick up on the Grok thing really quickly, I mean, are there not existing pieces of legislation that should deal with that? Like, you're effectively creating non-consensual sexual or pornographic images of other people. There's the Take It Down Act in the States, but even just broader sort of like criminal code stuff, is that not covered anywhere?
So it is in the sense. The problem is in the enforcement. So it is incredibly difficult to hold a platform accountable for every possible incident that breaches Canadian law. There's jurisdictional issues, but there are also just issues of liability. Who's liable? Is it the platform themselves or the users on the platform? Of adjudication. What if it's deleted right away? Of measuring the impact, right? What's the difference if 3 people see it versus 3 million? There's a whole host of things that are native to the technology, whether it be AI or social media, that don't align very well with the way we enforce laws in the physical world. They were just built for a different world.
So it's technically applicable, but not necessarily equipped to do it at this scale.
I mean, I think it's definitely not equipped, right? And it's sometimes applicable. There are also a host of cases that happen digitally that probably don't meet the criminal code threshold, but we also think might be a problem. And this is very important for like harmful speech, for example, right? Or hate speech. We're not saying they have to delete content. We're saying they not be doing things to incentivize or amplify content that could be perceived as hateful, right? So those are very different thresholds and obligations that we're placing that the criminal code is really bad at differentiating. There's a lot more gray area online, and I think responsible governance needs to sort of sit in that gray area.
Does AI pose a different regulatory challenge than social media in some ways because of social media, the engineers designing social media algorithms, they know to a fair degree of specificity how they work and how they can be tweaked. But with AI, at least this is what the party line is that it's a bit of a black box and they don't necessarily know why certain things emerge from these large language models. I mean, does that pose a challenge?
I mean, absolutely. But a challenge for whom, right? And I think where does the responsibility lie to figure out the solution to that challenge? And if what you're saying is we are going to launch a product on Canadian citizens and we have no ability whatsoever to determine whether it's going to act illegally and do illegal things. Like if that's what we're saying, then the rule of law is in trouble. So someone's going to have to solve that problem that you're talking about. And I believe that burden to at least show an effort to solve that problem should be on the companies that are developing and profiting from their deployment. And they do some of it, right? Like a model is trained in meaningful ways to reduce its harm. Now, is it sufficient or not? Well, that's the question, right? Like, are these safe enough to be deployed on Canadian society or not? And we're not even asking that question. So I think part of imposing these rules is to force that conversation about what do we mean by a product being safe to be used by Canadians. And I can imagine a whole host of lines that would receive broad Canadian consensus that we don't want these technologies to cross. Circulating child pornography, teaching people how to kill themselves, terrorist content, planning chemical weapons, right? Like I could go on and on and on with things that cross that line. But once we agree there's a line, the question is about how we define it and how we govern that line and where it should sit. And that's where our conversation needs to be now, is on that line.
I mean, it's striking.
You look so skeptical.
Well,
you don't believe a word of this.
No, I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think two things. One is that I'm struck because all the things you just listed have happened. Their AI systems have done all of those things in relatively recent memory.
Yeah.
But the second is that everything you've just laid out, those red lines, seem utterly reasonable. Is there resistance? Is there pushback to those lines that you've articulated just now? Or
I would say in theory there's not pushback, but there's debate about how they should be enforced and who's responsible for them. I don't think the tech companies would accept that they are liable for those use cases. They want to place onus on the users who committed the act.
Which is exactly what Elon Musk has tried to do with this Grok undressing.
100%, right? He said, we will report to law enforcement anyone who uses Grok in an illegal manner, right?
Right. We won't take away the capability of the chatbot to do that, but we will penalize people for using it.
And look, at the beginning of this sort of section of our conversation, you mentioned the precedent around social media. And this has been the posture of tech companies for a long time, which is that responsibility and onus ultimately lies on users. Now, over 20 years of coming to understand these technologies and coming to enter social media in particular, we know that, yes, users have a degree of agency, but also how these technologies are designed has a significant impact in how they're used. And we know that. And so therefore, how they're designed needs to be part of the conversation about how they're governed. And that's where we are with AI too. And all the responsibility for how they're used in society can't ultimately just be placed on kids or their parents or their teachers, right? These are structural problems that are, in some cases, embedded in the technologies themselves. And the same is the case with AI. Is it going to be hard? Yeah. And we're starting to see some of the lines of that debate being drawn, right? Like Sam Altman saying that there's a strong privacy consideration to how people use chatbots, right? That's different than social media. He's saying a chatbot should be treated like a lawyer or a doctor, in that all of our conversations with a chatbot should be privileged. And that's an interesting line, right? Because we are saying very intimate things to these chatbots, but it also absolves them of liability for the things that the chatbot says to them, right? And I don't think chatbots are taking a Hippocratic oath. So there isn't, and there aren't legal safeguards and professional associations governing them. And we haven't developed all those other safeguards that exist in the medical system. So he's asking for a degree of protection that we've given to spaces that we regulate in all sorts of other ways already, right?
And also that we've given to people.
To people, right.
That's
not
a fundamentally
to
different...
or to an AI.
Or a product, right? That's a very different thing.
Absolutely. Although I think a lot of people would like to see AI treated as human in many ways, both as an aspiration and what they're building, but also as a legal entity and as something that has rights, for example.
That's a whole other rabbit hole that I will avoid for now.
It is, but it's one we will go on, I guarantee, this year on the show, right? Like, I think that idea of sentience and rights and consciousness, and a lot of people are talking about that in a very serious way right now, and that's fascinating.
As they should be. I think it behooves us to figure this out before the technology gets there. Like, we don't want to be trying to playing catch up with these things once we have AI that appears largely sentient and humanoid robots and things like that.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Like, no matter what one thinks of AI, and I'm in many ways very excited about it, there is no doubt we are running a mass social experiment on ourselves with this technology. And I think we have to be clear-eyed that that's what we're doing. And we're doing it with almost no rules. And that's a hell of a bet we're making and a hell of an experiment we're all diving into. And there isn't the time, or we're not creating the time to have that conversation, right? That you're asking for, right? Of what do we want? How do we want it to operate? What do we want it to do and not do? Like, we're not having those conversations because we're immersed in a rapidly evolving experiment at the societal level. And we're betting our economy, and we're betting our lives and our education system that's developed over 2,000 years, as we talked about in an episode, right? Are we just going to throw that out because of a new technology? Like, maybe that's kind of what we're doing. But it's a hell of a bet.
So that's sort of the political and the policy dimension of next year. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the technology itself. I know we sort of said at the end, at the jump that we wouldn't do that, but I guess less sort of the technical evolution of it and more the evolution of how we are all using it in our lives. And one of your predictions for next year is that AI is going to get a lot better at many things, but it's still going to remain, and I'm paraphrasing here, kind of crappy at a lot of other things.
Yeah, I mean, this again is pulled from a lot of our conversations we've had over this season, but I mean, I think there's no question the utility and some of the capacities that it has are just getting better relatively quickly. And I think I certainly see this in how I use these technologies, and that Claude and ChatGPT of today are entirely different things than of a year ago. Like, they're just capable of way more things, and they're way more useful.
Where are you finding it most useful?
I find it's incredibly useful as a tool to bounce ideas off of, and as a critical reviewer of ideas and of content. Right? Like, it's almost like a good editor.
It's a great
good research assistant. It's remarkable, right? And I struggle personally with where the bounds of that lie, right? And I think that's where what we're all facing right now, right? But on the point of its capacity, it's getting really, really good at some of those things that I in the past would have to rely on other people for. Whether it's a great editor at a magazine or a newspaper, or a research assistant to bounce things off, or to provide first cuts at reviewing documents, or whatever it might be, right? Like a whole
podcast producer.
I mean, I don't want to say. No, there's certain things that are untouchable, Mitch, and this is clearly one of them.
Oh, it's only a matter of time. I'm well aware.
So I see the increased utility, and I think that I have every indication from the people we've spoken to and what we read on this stuff that that's only going to increase, right? Like, they're going to get better in many ways at doing many things. But the flip side, and this comes from our conversation with Gary Marcus, which really sort of brought this home, I think, which is that there might be some flaws in these things that are endemic to them. That it could be, in his argument, and this is a very contested idea, right, in the AI world, but his and many others' belief is that there's something about language models, the kind of AI that we're now all using, might have an endemic flaw, which is hallucinations. And if that's the case, and if there's a consistent 10% error rate, for example, in AI, whatever it is, right, or even 1% error rate, that will have a profound effect on its overall impact on society. Either we use it despite that error rate and we begin to accept it, right? And in some fields that will be more acceptable than others, or it really unravels the utility, right? That maybe we're not willing to accept that error rate, and it just means that this kind of AI is going to reach a threshold or a ceiling of its utility in society. And I don't think we know the answer to that.
So in preparation for this, I pulled some of the numbers. So it's a bit hard to get the sort of to figure out do the math on it, because not all the companies release the hallucination rates for each model.
Right. Yeah.
Broadly, from what I've gleaned, 10% is sort of the general hallucination rate across all models, but some of them are like shockingly high. So there's a benchmark called the simple QA that they use, which basically just it's for facts. They ask factual questions to the models and see what the rate of accuracy is.
Yeah.
But GPT-5, which is the most recent OpenAI model, had a 47% hallucination rate on the simple QA. So almost half. And then there was another test where they were asking these models medical questions, and DeepSeek, which is the famous Chinese model, had an 80% hallucination rate.
Wow, I hadn't seen that. That's remarkable.
So it's not like occasional errors that are happening.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if I mean, I think your question of where it matters is an interesting one. But I would think even in something inane, like if you're booking a vacation or something, I mean, a 10% error rate on booking the right hotel or the right flight, that's not really a useful product in many ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few things that stem from that observation and those stats, which is fascinating. But like, one is, why don't we make the reporting of hallucinations a requirement? That's the kind of thing, and when we talk about regulation, like those are the kind of transparency rules we could impose, right? Like, I think it would be very helpful to know as a user of each of these tools how accurate they were or not on a range of different things. The other side, though, is how are they going to commoditize their product with that degree of error? So you mentioned the travel one, right? Like ChatGPT is trying to get into the travel booking game, and the Amazon is likely might have a deal for embedding product or the ability to purchase things right into ChatGPT, right? So I don't know, if I'm a hotel and I get fraudulent information about my hotel 10 or 20 or 30% of the time, am I going to want to use OpenAI as my platform for selling my product, right? And so I think there's that reliability is going to come home to roost as well on the commodification side of their product.
So I think that dovetails nicely into your final prediction of the year, which is that we started this conversation by saying last year was really the year that everyone started using these tools. They became really commonplace.
Yeah.
And with that, you're anticipating that next year we'll really start to see cultural norms emerge around how we're using these tools.
Yeah.
Where do you think we might see that happening first? Or is it already happening in certain spheres?
I think it's happening in all sorts of spheres, right? Like we've talked about some of them already, but like, how are any institutions going to navigate the implementation of these tools in their workforces and their communities? And that means we as users of them are going to have to develop norms around what we find okay and how we're going to use them, right? So I can imagine this in the music world, right? Are we going to be okay with Spotify music generated by AI? Or are we going to demand from Spotify that we want those labeled? Right? Like that's a norm that's going to be driven by the consumer in a certain way, right? Or are we okay with YouTube videos being flooded with AI generated influencers and our social media feeds with fake people, right? Which Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, just said that it's going to be indistinguishable this year. and that their platform's going to be flooded with fake people, right? And like, are we okay with that? And maybe we are, and that will become a new norm. Or maybe we'll have signals that we'll give each other for what is real and what isn't. Or are we going to start putting a premium on human-generated content, right? Like, that's a norm as well. I think in the education system, we're going to start figuring out what we're okay with and not. I know at McGill, we're in the middle of a deep, deep struggle over how to navigate this. And it's being left on professors to decide in their classroom what they find acceptable and not, and how they're going to use this technology or not, and how they're going to allow its use by students and not. And those are all norms that we're figuring out on the fly.
And I think students are figuring out some of those norms themselves as well. I think if you go to a university Reddit page, you'll see a real bifurcation happening where some of them are avid AI users and others are saying you're basically throwing your degree down the toilet if you use AI to write all your assignments. So I think
even worse than that, you're devaluing your own education and you're devaluing mine is a reaction a lot of students.
What's the argument there?
Like you see it a lot in group work. So like if you're in a group of 4 people and one person's just using AI for everything, how do you navigate that, right? And they're looking to professors to navigate it for them or to adjudicate it for them. But there's no guidance to us on how to adjudicate it either, right? And we're all figuring this out on what is legitimate and what isn't, or what is cheating or what isn't, or what, like, these are all norms, right? That we've developed over decades and centuries, and they're being thrown in the air. And I think if the last year was about adopting it, and we will continue with more adoption this year, I'm sure, this year is about figuring out how we are adopting and what we're okay with and not. And it's going to be messy, right? I really think it's going to be messy.
And one of the challenges, I think, too, thinking about your 4 students example or in the workplace, is as the models get better, it's becoming more difficult to tell what is AI-generated work and what is human-generated work.
Yes.
Do you feel like you can tell?
No. Sometimes. I think the ability to tell is a straw man because it obfuscates from the real problem, which is that we will not be able to tell over time, right? So it puts off the inevitable problem. And it creates a binary between this was AI generated or this was not, which I think is certainly in the education space, that's the trap we've fallen into, or many people have fallen into, is if you used AI, it's all encompassing and it was cheating. And if you didn't, it's human generated and it's okay. And I think the gray area is much more nuanced in that there's hundreds of ways one could use AI to help your process in ways that could be seen as cheating and could be not be seen as cheating, right? And I think just saying that this, you can tell this is AI, therefore you're going to treat it one way, is sort of obfuscating from that complexity, which is really where this problem lies. And it's almost certainly the case that we will not be able to tell at some point, even if we think we can sometimes now.
And we may almost be there at this point.
I think we largely are. I think we largely are, particularly people who use it in a way that is like a little bit thoughtful.
More nuanced, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, I can often tell when people send me things that I see have been influenced by AI. The bigger question is what you do about that. And this is where I think, this is where norms get important though, right? Like I personally think a degree of transparency goes a long way, right? Like I don't like someone sending me something and saying, I wrote this, can you take a look at it? And I can tell it's done by AI. And I don't know why that bugs me, but it just kind of does, right? Maybe that's a legacy effect of my old pre-AI brain, right? But I would much rather someone say, look, I developed this thing and I used AI a little bit. Can you give me your thoughts?
I think the reason I butt up against it is if you send me something that you've worked on, I know you spent a certain degree of, you put a certain degree of thought and time into it. And if you send me something that is an AI output, I have no idea how reflective that is of your thought, how deeply you thought about it.
Exactly.
And then I approach it and think about it in a very different way because it is something fundamentally different.
But that's a norm. That's because you have I feel I am the same way, that if I send you 1,000-word thing, you know how long it takes me to write something. You know that like yes, some people are faster writers than others, right? But like you went through a process that you can understand to create that 1,000 words, right? If I hit generate on something, there's no process to creating 1,000 words anymore. And I personally like to know how much of somebody's thoughts are in something. However, like I accept that that's a new form of creation, and it's the cat's out of the bag on that one, right? We're not putting that one back. So the only solution is rules amongst us and norms amongst us of how we're going to signal its use, or how we're going to be transparent and honest with each other, and where that's appropriate versus where that's needed versus where it's not needed, and that kind of thing. Like,
I think you're onto something with the transparency thing, because you don't want to discredit or discount AI outputs entirely, because they can be quite useful. But it's almost akin to if you got your assistant or an RA or something to write something for you.
Yeah,
you would sort of want to know who authored it. I think we need to make sure authorship is still pretty clearly demarcated.
I mean, I really want to do an episode on that, on writing and AI in the coming months, and because it's something I think a lot about. Like, what is authorship now? And I think we had a very clear idea for a very long time of what that meant, and the relationship between writing and thinking. And both of those things have been fundamentally upended, I think. And I'm not sure how we navigate out of that. But I think I'm not sure we're going back on that one.
The other area where I was thinking about maybe we need norms is in our personal lives. So 70%, more than 70% of American teens have used an AI companion. Many find it easier to talk to an AI than talk to their parents. People are writing birthday cards and things like that with AI.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this whole concept of cognitive offloading that places like MIT have started researching, where when you use chatbots, you're offloading a part of your cognition to the chatbot.
Yeah.
It almost feels like we may be approaching emotional offloading as well, using some of these to offload our emotional responsibility or capacity. Is that something we should be keeping an eye on, worried about?
I mean, you tell me. I sure think so. My God. I mean, I saw a story recently about how often people are using AI to navigate difficult conversations, whether it's like breaking up with somebody or whatever it might be, right? Conversation with your parents or whatever it is, right? And I do wonder, like, maybe there's some value in that. But if you're a teenager navigating a personal dynamic, figuring life out, and you're both just using your AIs to draft your texts back and forth, like, what are we losing there? And it's got to be something.
Especially in those formative, it's one thing. It's sort of like in the academic context too. It's one thing if you spent 20 or 30 years learning how to write or learning how to navigate life's emotional complexities, and then you're using it as a tool. It's another thing entirely when, as you're learning or developing those skills,
you have this crutch, right? You're on
then you may never learn how to write or to break up with someone, or right?
No, or maybe we just all get better at it. Like maybe it's like coming up with smarter answers to how to deal with a tough conversation, and maybe it helps us have them rather than avoid them, right? And maybe that's beneficial, right? It gives you a helping hand on how to navigate life, and maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But again, it's like a societal-wide experiment on whether it is a good thing or not. And we're throwing ourselves into it.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Yeah. I wonder, just to close, if there's one thing that you wanted listeners to pay attention to for the next 12 months, what would that be? What's sort of your parting message for 2026?
I think we should pay attention and take seriously what some of the more thoughtful people building these technologies say they are building and what they think the consequences of building it are. They're not all in agreement, as we've talked about on the show a lot, and there's a lot of smart debate between them. But I think there's some real, fairly profound implications that I think 2 or 3 years ago, as we were talking about, could have been seen as pure speculation or hype or tech utopianism or whatever we want to call it. But I think now feels more real to me anyway, that these are possibilities. And areas around human augmentation and what it will do to the sciences and medical research and labor market issues. Like, I think these are real societal concerns that are now very much potentially in our near future. And I think it's something we've got to take seriously and start preparing for in real ways. And I don't think we're doing that yet at all. Like, we talked about the policy stuff, and like the policies we're talking about are on the edges of any of this. They're not yet honed in on these more potentially profound changes. And I think we got to start thinking about those.
And having conversations about what we actually want, I think.
Yeah, and participating in them, right? Like, I think it's incumbent on us too to voice our feelings about this. I think we do have some agency in what ends up being adopted in our societies. And if we don't like these things, we need to say so. If we want them to be developed for different reasons with different incentives, then we need to articulate that. And I think it's incumbent on governments to listen and to create processes through which they can hear citizens. And so far, governments have not done that, to be clear, like at all. They have not asked citizens what they want. And it's incumbent on them to ask and to engage with them in a way that's meaningful. But it's also incumbent on us to participate in those conversations and to force them. Because if not, there's a path dependency here, right? We will get what 5 companies decide to build if we don't. We may get that anyway. That cat might be out of the bag as well. And that might be our future already defined or in the process of being defined right now. But if we want any say in it, then we need to vocalize that. And this is probably the year to start doing that in a serious way.
I wonder if there's a real risk too in having a too narrow a view of what the technology can do. Like you just mentioned, 5 companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, they're all building basically the same things. They're all building large language model, general purpose chatbots.
Yeah.
But there's some amazing things. Like we're working on an interview right now about using AI to talk to animals or using AI to recover near extinct indigenous languages. Like there's some amazing use cases for this stuff. But really the sort of the public imagination has been captured by chatbots. And I wonder if we're doing ourselves a bit of a disservice by being so narrow.
Yeah, it feels so trite in so many ways, right? And it's a strategic choice. And you do hear about other countries. I mean, there's been a lot of reporting about how China's developing their AI industry and what they're focusing it at. And I think that's a very interesting counterpoint to what America's done, in that instead of looking for general purpose AGI chasing models, they are targeting AI at different sectors, like purpose-built AI for different sectors. And I think that's a very different strategy. Switzerland's developed a open public model that they're providing to Swiss citizens and Swiss industry and making like a public AI model, which is a very different path as well. So I think you're right. I mean, people in the sciences will say, and like, you should be just devoting fully AI capacity to solving medical challenges. Like if you want to do the most possible good with the technology, surely like putting all your eggs in curing cancer and solving medical problems would be a far better investment than chatbots. But we're not making those choices, right, collectively. And I think partly it's where those choices aren't being communicated to people. And I think that's incumbent on us too, to not set into this idea that AI is just one thing, and that one thing is what's being presented by 5 companies.
Yeah, it's a nice place to end. Do you want to put any money on your predictions for this year?
Not a cent. If not, I'd be in Polymarket as we speak. Machines Like Us is produced by Paradigms in collaboration with the Globe and Mail. The show is produced by Mitchell Stuart. Our theme song is by Chris Kelly. Our executive producer is James Millward. Special thanks to Angela Pacenza and the team at the Globe and Mail. If you liked the interview you just heard, please subscribe and leave a rating or a comment. It really does help us get the show to as many people as possible. Machines Like Us is supported by the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. Learn more at mcgill.ca/maxbellschool. Machines Like Us is also supported by CFAR, a global research organization based in Canada. Explore their work at cfar.ca.